Imagine a warship so colossal it could swallow an entire naval fleet. A floating fortress 2,000 feet long, displacing 2 million tons of frozen water. Its hull so thick that torpedoes would bounce off like pebbles. Now imagine that this beast was not built of steel, but of ice. Not just any ice, but a secret classified material, frozen solid with the pulp of ordinary wood. This isn't science fiction. This is Project Habakkuk, the frozen ghost of the British Royal Navy, conceived in the darkest winter of the Second World War. The year is 1942. The Battle of the Atlantic is raging, and Britain is gasping for air. German U-boats, the Wolfpacks, are prowling the deep, silently stalking the merchant convoys that keep the island nation alive. In the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, there is a critical gap, the Mid-Atlantic Gap, where land-based aircraft cannot reach to provide air cover. Here the U-boats hunt without fear, and Allied ships vanish into the abyss. The Royal Navy is stretched to its breaking point. They desperately need more aircraft carriers to close the gap, to shield the convoys from the relentless submarine onslaught. But there is a catastrophic problem: steel. Britain's shipyards are bombed out, her resources drained. There is simply not enough steel in the empire to build both the destroyers and the desperately needed carriers. A radical, unthinkable solution is required, and it arrives from the brilliant, bizarre mind of a man named Geoffrey Pike. Geoffrey Pike was not a military man. He was a journalist, an educator, a mad genius who escaped a German prison camp in the First World War. He looked like a character from a Charles Dickens novel, wild-eyed and unkempt, a man whose brain operated on a different frequency than the rest of humanity. Pike was the head of Project POW and a master of outside the box, thinking for Lord Mountbatten's combined operations. When the steel shortage crisis hit, Pike looked at the map and looked at the problem. He realized the Arctic and North Atlantic were already frozen. Nature provides mountains of ice utterly free, completely immune to magnetic mines, and practically unstoppable. Ice was the perfect armor. If you hit a block of ice with a torpedo, you get a dent and some spray. The colossal energy of an explosion simply vaporizes a little frozen water. The physics were undeniable, so Pike proposed the absurd: construct a 2-million-ton aircraft carrier out of a hollowed-out iceberg, capable of launching Spitfires and Mosquitoes right in the heart of the neutralizing zone. This wasn't a ship, it was a mobile island. The idea floated up the chain of command to Vice Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten, the charismatic and daring chief of combined operations. Mountbatten was not a man who dismissed the impossible. He was a man who championed it. When he saw the concept, he didn't see a joke. He saw a weapon that could win the war. But the engineering reality of a natural iceberg was a nightmare. Ice is brittle. It shatters under pressure. It floats unpredictably, with 90% of its mass hidden beneath the waterline. A critical danger to any vessel nearby. Worst of all, it melts. A pure ice carrier dragging through the warmer currents of the Gulf Stream would begin to transform into a slushy the moment it left port. The project was on the verge of being frozen solid by the laws of thermodynamics. Then salvation arrived from an unlikely source. In the refrigerated laboratory deep beneath a meat market in London, two biochemists made a discovery that turned science fiction into structural reality. Their names were Max Perutz and Hermann Mark. They mixed ordinary wood pulp, essentially sawdust, into fresh water before freezing it. The result was a revolutionary new composite they named Picrete, in honor of the mad genius himself. This was not just ice. This was a super material. The wood pulp created a reinforcing matrix, like rebar in concrete, stopping cracks from propagating. A block of picrete could be struck with a hammer, and the hammer would simply bounce off. When a bullet hit pure ice, the block would shatter into 1,000 pieces. When a bullet hit a block of picrete, it left a shallow crater, the high-velocity round defeated by frozen wood fibers. It was unstoppable, not because it floated, but because it was buoyant ice. The melting rate was dramatically slower due to the insulating properties of the wood fibers. You could machine it like wood, cast it like concrete, and repair it with a bucket of seawater and pulp. The dream was now physically possible. All they needed was a freezer and a national supply of sawdust. Winston Churchill, the indomitable Prime Minister, a man who adored bizarre military inventions, was briefed on the secret project. He sat in his bathtub, steam rising, puffing a cigar, and listened to Mountbatten's proposal. His order was succinct: "Go ahead." The specifications for the Habakkuk were breathtakingly audacious. The vessel would be 2,000 feet long, that is 5 times the length of a modern nuclear aircraft carrier. Its beam would span 300 feet. The walls of this ice fortress would be 40 feet thick, a glacial armor belt that no conventional torpedo or bomb could ever hope to breach. A complex onboard refrigeration plant would circulate chilled brine through a network of pipes, keeping the hull frozen solid even in summer. It would displace 2 million tons of water, have a crew of thousands, and carry a full wing of twin-engine bombers. The steering was a problem. Rudders would snap. The solution was to place massive diesel engines in pods on the sides, rotating independently to steer the ship. It was a floating airfield, a mechanical iceberg with the soul of a warship. The code name for this frozen leviathan was Project Habakkuk, an intentional misspelling of the biblical prophet Habakkuk, whose verse stated, "Be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told." The message was clear: this was a miracle weapon. But theory is a ghost until it is tested. To convince the skeptical chiefs of staff, a dramatic demonstration was required. In the winter of 1943, during a top-secret conference, Lord Mountbatten walked into a high-level Allied meeting carrying 2 large blocks. The room was filled with the smoke of cigars and the heavy weight of military bureaucracy. Without a word, Mountbatten placed 1 block of pure ice and 1 block of pickrete on the polished table. He turned to the assembled generals and admirals, drew his service revolver, and fired directly into the pure ice. The room jumped. The ice block exploded instantly, shards flying across the room, splinters of frozen water raining onto the brass. The chaos was immediate. Then Mountbatten aimed at the pickrete. He fired a second shot. The bullet ricocheted off the frozen block with a high-pitched whine, zipping across the room and grazing the trouser leg of Air Chief Marshal Sir Charles Portal. The military chief stared at the smoking revolver and the unharmed bulletproof ice. The demonstration, while nearly injuring an Allied commander, was devastatingly effective. Pickrete was approved. To build a floating mountain, you need a freezing factory. The site chosen was Patricia Lake, hidden deep within the Canadian Rockies in Alberta. Here, far from prying eyes and U-boats, construction began on a reduced-scale prototype. Conscientious objectors, men who refused to fight but were willing to build, were drafted into the secret project. They worked through the bitter winter, freezing the lake water onto a wooden framework. The prototype was 60 feet long and weighed 1,000 tons. It was a miniature iceberg, a proof of concept, tucked away in the pine-scented Canadian wilderness. The massive refrigeration system hummed day and night, a mechanical heartbeat keeping the monster frozen. The sheer logistical nightmare of manufacturing 2 million tons of pickrete and keeping a living iceberg from collapsing under its own massive weight was slowly crushing the dream. The internal heating of the massive engine rooms threatened to melt the ship from the inside out. Pike, the eccentric creator, fought violently against the cancellations, scribbling ever more complex blueprints for cooling pipes, but the generals were no longer listening. Winston Churchill, who once bathed in the glory of the frozen fortress, slowly withdrew his support as the price tag ballooned to a staggering level. The cost was approaching that of a conventional superfleet. The war was moving forward. The Battle of the Atlantic was slowly tilting in favor of the Allies through code-breaking and radar, not ice. By late 1943, Project Habakkuk was officially iced. The prototype in Patricia Lake was simply abandoned. The refrigeration system was switched off. The sawdust-infused ice, which had resisted bullets and summer sun, finally surrendered to nature. Slowly, silently, The frozen ghost of the unstoppable carrier melted back into the dark, cold waters of the Canadian lake, leaving no trace that it ever existed. The secret documents were locked away, and the blueprints for the greatest warship never built vanished into classified archives. Today, Habakkuk rests on the bottom of Patricia Lake, a sonar shadow slowly decaying into the silt. Divers sometimes visit the submerged wooden framework, the brittle bones of a dream that defied the laws of both war and physics. It stands as a monument to a unique moment in human history when desperation rewrote the definition of possibility. To the pragmatic admiral, it was a failure of resources. But to the visionary, it remains a staggering achievement of imagination. In the frozen darkness of a Canadian lake, the bulletproof ghost of the unstoppable carrier sleeps, a silent testament to the moment humanity tried to weaponize winter itself.